Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for session 7, I believe, of the Urban Festival 2021 main conference. We'll be starting this session with Huda Tayob, who's an architect and architectural historian, as well as a lecturer at the UCT School of Architecture, Planning and Geomatics. I think I have that correct. Huda and Tayob and I have, in various ways, not connected as much as we would have liked over the last 15 years through some common friends in architecture dating back to, I think, 2010, if not earlier. So thank you so much for joining us. Huda, there's sometimes you're on the internet and you're scrolling and you go to yourself, how could I miss this work and the kind of work that you do? And we were researching and curating the program for the Rebuild City, not just looking at COVID, but looking at water crises, looking at crises around unrest and how that links to people identity. And I came across your project, the Archive of Forgetfulness, which is obviously quite creative, but you call it an archive of mobility and infrastructure. And the fact that the pandemic has sort of laid bare the frailty of our basic urban infrastructure. So and the quality of that as well. But I think what I really loved is in the way in which you and the team curated contributions to this topic. So it's not just another white paper or another PowerPoint presentation, which we're also used to, but perhaps you could explain to us what the Archive of Forgetfulness is. And then, we have 10 or 15 minutes to share some of the films and creative contributions that came from that. Thanks so much again for joining us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rashik, for the invitation. It's really great to be able to share this project. Always good in different contexts. And I think it's as you say, I think what's interesting about it is that these are critical responses, but they're also really creative responses. So the Archive of Forgetfulness is an online exhibition and podcast series that began in August last year. It is, however, part of a longer project that was called the Neighborhoods Project. It's funded by the Goethe Institute, and it is very much a collaborative Pan-African project. So while I'm presenting it today and I am the lead curator and project manager of this, I work as part of a wider team of researchers and artists based across the continent, including Bongani Kona, Zakia Hafaji, and then a series of regional curators who also have curated parts of this. Princess Mshlongo from South Africa, Ali Al-Adawi from Egypt, Eric Ngangare from Rwanda, Amia Shokat from Sudan, Zubeida Msefer from Morocco, and Jumoke Sanwo from Nigeria. And I think it's important to name them because this is what also makes the project what it is. So this project builds on an existing Africa-wide Goethe project titled Neighborhoods, which was interested in questions of mobility across the African continent, rather than focusing on flight and escape. And this started in 2018 initially, without any major outputs, but with a series of meetings and conversations. And so in 2020, I was asked to join as project manager. And in this current life of the project, we made a move away from the static framing of the neighborhood to ask what it means to think about neighborliness, to rethink borders, and to ask what it means literally, culturally, and politically to engage with materialities, histories, and narrations of movement. And part of our interest in stories is also to take seriously oral histories as so important to this continent, among other forms of archives, though. So we began in August 2020 during COVID-19 lockdowns, when the ability to move was particularly limited, but which really also drew attention to some of the violences of borders and infrastructures. The project name takes inspiration from Mahmoud Darwish's prose Memory for Forgetfulness. And we drew on his work and his writing as a way of drawing lines of connection across the continent, inviting in voices, stories, opening up new conversations as an active form of remembering, but also to engage with what exists in the failure of memory. So in acknowledging that forgetting is an active part of remembering. The project in practical terms has 22 artist submissions or projects that were part of an open call, 5 essays, 8 podcasts, and alongside 6 regionally curated works that have been released throughout this year. And we have 2 more before the end of the year that are going to happen very soon. There are many powerful pieces that question forms of entanglement, sonic and textual archives, questions of blackness, flight, dreams of other worlds that could have been possible and might have been. Right, and I have chosen 3 particular film projects to share today, which I want to briefly introduce. But I don't know if you have any questions or.
Well, I was first going to ask you to perform the prose, but I think we don't have enough time to perform that. But I think let's go ahead and share that. I think there's so many, but let's share as many as we can.
Yeah, and I think I chose projects to share today that I think particularly speak to infrastructures and were made during 2020 or some a bit earlier, but so to briefly, I'll introduce it and then I'll just show the films as a playlist. So the first is an excerpt by a film called The Bridge by Caio Simões de Arejão. The Bridge is a short film that speaks about the bridge connecting Maputo to the fishing village of Catembe on the other side of the Maputo Bay. And it's paradigmatic of Chinese-led infrastructural mega projects in the global south in general and in Africa in particular. As the film shows us, however, that the bridge is not merely a monumental engineering project. It involved great economic change and restructuring of public finances and carried with it the promises of urban renewal and the development of southern Mozambique more broadly. The visual essay, The Bridge, as it's described, assembles an immersive, experiential and memorial register of the instances of public performance surrounding the Maputo Catembe Bridge in its moment of inauguration in November 2018. So all images and sounds were collected during this weekend and includes both congratulatory but also critical reflections on the bridge. The author, Caio Araujo, is an anthropologist and historian based in Johannesburg at Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research, where he works in the project Regions 2050, headed by Achille Mbembe. The second piece that I'll show is also a film piece by the artist Cherise Dilraj, and the title is Existence is an Occupation. In this film, Dilraj engages with the legacies of colonialism, settler colonialism, and neo-colonialism, apartheid and the Group Areas Act, and shows how they live on where many are forcibly removed from their land. She puts the South African context into conversation with forced displacements by the Israeli Defense Force using archival footage that she's found, and suggests that people are occupying, not invading land, where the act of existing becomes an occupation. Cherise Dilraj holds a fine arts degree from the University of Witwatersrand and is currently pursuing an MA at Goldsmiths University in London. She works with migration and culture, inherited histories, and confronting and disrupting violence through social practice and multidisciplinary forms. And the third project is a film called GeoQuiz by the film collective Low Def Film Factory. GeoQuiz, for over a year, GeoQuiz was engaged in a research project looking at archives, mapping physical resources in Central and Southern Africa. GeoQuiz is an old 80s, oh gosh, I forgot to share this, sorry. I see the requests for, GeoQuiz is an old 80s geography board, which the authors happened across at a flea market. It didn't have instructions, so they couldn't figure out exactly how to play it, but decided to experiment with it. The video forms part of their, broader project looking at uranium in the DRC and South Africa, a mineral which has been at the root of great conflict. And their work looks at the relationship between raw materials, technology, and movement, studying colonial practices which have continued into this century and how technological infrastructures trace the roots of former empires. Low Def Film Factory is a participatory community cinema initiative created by Francois Knutzer and Amy Louise Wilson. They employ an experimental praxis which emphasizes co-creation and mistake-making with an aim to create space for video storytelling. Okay, so these are the 3 projects, and you can see them in full at archiveofforgetfulness.com, but I will share, apologies. So I'll show 3, an excerpt of the first film and then 2 others. Is it sharing okay?
I can't see anything yet, but I think it's loading.
Huda, can you just optimize for video when you share your screen?
Do you see the video still? By any chance?
We see the slide, but we don't see the video, or well, we see the video, but it's not playing yet.
Okay, that's perfect.
Huda, unfortunately, we can't hear. Would you mind to stop sharing your screen? When you share your screen again, can you tick both boxes for audio and video?
Yes, I have ticked them.
You have them?
Yes, exactly as we did the test. I'm not sure what the issue is. I see, okay, it's not playing.
Maybe what we can do is try one more time, and then if not, if it doesn't work, then we can, you can share the link for the video, if that's possible.
I can, so you can actually watch them on the Archive of Forgetfulness website, which Rashik shared. But let's see, we did test this and it was perfectly fine earlier. So let's see.
I think I'll also just try on my side and we can just see if it works.
Da dívida para pagar uma ponte que beneficia a menos de 5% de moçambicanos.
Okay, it's playing. Thanks.
vamos ter aqui uma cidade que eu penso que será tão ou mais desenvolvida do que aquela que nós conhecemos. Porque vamos ter não só espaço para as infraestruturas sociais, para o desenvolvimento do turismo, e vai ser bastante aprazível para os munícipes de Maputo e também para os nossos visitantes. Creio que vamos atrair muitos visitantes nacionais e estrangeiros. Vamos tratar a Catembe com um mimo, porque é a zona de expansão natural da cidade de Maputo.
É necessário que as autoridades observem o ordenamento, pois temos aqui uma única oportunidade de iniciar uma nova cidade, a cidade do futuro.
When the white men first came here from over the seas, he looked and he said, "This is God's own country." He was mighty well pleased with this land that he found, and he said, "I will make here my own piece of ground." Now many's the battle he still had to fight, and many's the family who died in the night, 'cause many's the black men who lived all around, all of them wanting their own piece of ground. Then one fine day in 1883, gold was discovered in good quantity. Now the country was rich and was richer than planned, and each digger wanted his own piece of land. White diggers were few and the gold was so deep. Black man was called 'cause his labor was cheap. With cruel and a shovel, it's all underground. 6 pennies a day to tender the ground. Now this land is so rich and it seems strange to me that the black man whose labor has helped it to be cannot enjoy the fruits that abound. He's uprooted and kicked from his own piece of land. Why some people say, "Now don't you worry, we'll get you a nice piece of reserved territory, but I'll give my love that 10 million can be found on a miserable 30% of the ground." Yes, Some people say, no, don't you worry. You can always find jobs in the white man's city, but don't stay too long and don't stay too deep, for you're bound to disturb the white man in his sleep.
GeoQuiz, an educational South African geography game.
But who are these South Africans? And what are they like under this surface of pageantry? How do they live? And what
Instructions. 1. The game may be played by any number of players up to a maximum of 5.
Factors influencing the location of this region, market and harbour location, midway between Cape Town and Durban, harbour located close to major industries in South Africa.
Inextricably linked with the practices and vocabularies of colonialism.
Very small part of the various lands and peoples of Southern Africa.
The most simple topographic map, or the most simple city map, is already a manipulation. It's already representing the world as the one who has done the map sees it.
Thousands of Boer farmers, descendants of the original Dutch settlers, left Cape Colony to open up the interior.
And you look down, so you've got a clear view of what's going on.
Okay, I'm going to stop there just in the interest of time.
Thanks so much, Huda. We could have kept watching for a couple of more hours, actually. So, and you mentioned just before you have to run off, 2 or 3 more contributions. Can we just follow them on Instagram and the website that are being released this side of the year?
Yes, we have this very interesting project by Ali Al-Adawi, which should be released on Monday next week. And it's a speculative project that really asks what it means to look at archives through a speculative lens. So he's got a film piece, a DJ set, and an essay which questions what Egypt would be like if the Mediterranean didn't exist. And it draws on archives, but also speculative work. And then the last project, which will happen next month, is by Zubaida Msefer, which is tracing the history of a woman in her family who was briefly married to her great-grandfather, who was a slave woman, and looking at her history of traveling between Morocco and Manchester in the early 20th century. So,
great, thanks so much. We'll follow the website and follow the Instagram. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for the amazing start to this session. I think we're all sort of a bit.
Thank you. Apologies for the technical issues.
I think between stage 4, load shedding, and Zoom and technology, we always seem to have these issues. Up next, we are fortunate to have Lebogang from the South African Cities Network. Another great contribution to the festival has been that various sustainability projects and sort of best practice examples have been shared by different cities. So yesterday we had the Tshwane House building being shared, and the intention and the features. And Lebogang will be sharing another project today. Over to yourself, Lebogang. Thank you.
Thanks, Rashid, for the introduction. So I'm coming in with a different hat today, not so much behind the scenes. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen, and you'll just let me know if you can see it, Rashid.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, just hold up a second, and we can kick off. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. As Rashid said, my name is Lebogang Lichuba, and I am from the South African Cities Network, presenting on behalf of City of Ekurhuleni. Part of the reason that we took on this work is to showcase some of the interesting approaches that the different cities have been taking around sustainability practices. And this particular case study looks at how the city is tackling the world's worst weed, aquatic weed in Ekurhuleni, with focus on the Blesbokspruit wetland. So as an overview of what we'll be talking about, I'll be taking you through, firstly, why wetlands matter in our cities, why the city of Ekurhuleni is embarking on this project, how the city is responding to the water hyacinth wetland invasion, and how they're using partnerships to clean up the water in the wetland, And then also some of the interesting methods the city is applying to tackle the invasive weed at the Blesbokspruit wetland. It's a bit of a tongue twister for me to say that word. And then finally, we'll look at how they're measuring progress and what indicators they're using to measure the success of the project. So just as a quick understanding or overview of why we need to care about our wetlands and what they mean in cities. So wetlands are water sponges that essentially absorb water, release it slowly, filtering out any impurities that won't be supportive for flora and fauna to grow and thrive. And this is quite important for us to note because wetlands play a critical role in climate change impacts, in that they have the ability to store water and as a result, reduce the impacts of flooding in different areas. So this direct benefit then is that it reduces risks and vulnerabilities to surrounding communities. And also in South Africa, wetlands are one of the most threatened ecosystems. So it's important that we preserve and protect these wetlands because they provide various assets for us. Some of these assets include environments that create a space for agricultural activities, tourism. They create spaces for people to gather and recreation. And from an environmental point of view, wetlands also improve water quality, build biodiversity banks, allowing for a range of plant and animal life to grow. The city of Ekurhuleni is home to a broader wetland system that is of great significance to South Africa. And of those wetlands, the Blesbokspruit catchment system is one of them. This wetland is surrounded by 5 towns in the eastern region of Gauteng, which include Springs, Boksburg, Benoni, Brakpan, and Nigel. The city of Ekurhuleni has been rehabilitating this wetland to get it back to a fully fledged RAMSAR site. RAMSAR is an international treaty that for the conservation and sustainable use of wetlands. This wetland has currently lost its licensing because of the state of the wetland, and hence the city is embarking on this rehabilitation project to get it back to that status. Also to note is that this wetland is one of the largest in Southern Africa and the only RAMSAR site in Gauteng, so it's quite important that it gets back to its former glory and status. The current challenges faced by this wetland include industry and mining activities, drainage and sewer leaks. Also, the plants in the wetland are clogged by salts and heavy metals, and the waterways are choked by the water hyacinth. So if you look on the left, you'll see this lush and green plant that, is beautiful, but this is quite deceiving because this is quite a noxious weed that changes chemical properties in the water and destroys aquatic biodiversity. And this is what the city is essentially working to remove at the Blesbokspruit wetland. For the city of Ekurhuleni, it's quite important then that they get rid of this water hyacinth, and it's been a long process that's involved development of policies, strategies, and plans on the ground. And the city is also quite aware of its limitations, and so it's not doing this alone. It's working in collaboration with multiple role players and stakeholders, which include the National Department of Water and Sanitation, and as well as the Rhodes University and city administration. The Blue Deal is also a global partnership that the National Department of Water and Sanitation forms part of, and what it seeks to achieve is to have better access to clean water for South Africans by 2030. So this means that in the next 9 years, we aim to have good water management systems, teams that are well knowledgeable and the expertise to keep our waters clean, well-functioning organizations in cooperation with key stakeholders. There are several policies that have been developed by the city. One of them being the climate change and response strategy. The strategy calls specifically for actions to preserve wetlands, protect and rehabilitate our aquatic systems, implement policies that prevent development on wetlands, and conduct awareness and education campaigns. And I think this project itself just starts to demonstrate that the city is taking the need for integrating nature into planning and development quite seriously. So some of the interesting methods that the city has taken to tackle the stubborn weed, you can see the graphics at the bottom of the slide there. So it's noted that this is quite a stubborn species, and the Environmental and Resource Management Department of City of Ekurhuleni has been looking for long-term sustainable solutions to this problem. They've used multiple methods to tackle this alien species. Initially, the department focused on manually removing the water hyacinths and spraying them with herbicides, but they've recently acquired with a mechanical amphibious water machine, which mechanically removes the species. This machine was launched in Germiston Lake in 2020, and the City of Ekurhuleni released biocontrol insects to fight water hyacinths as part of a pilot. And these natural methods that the city is using are quite critical in making sure that this plant doesn't spread even further in the wetland and compromise the biodiversity there. So the city is also still looking for effective ways of using the water hyacinths, and some of the things that has been considered is using this plant productively for composting. Finally, then we look at how the city has been going about to track their progress and measure success. The department's work is included in the IDP and measured quarterly through specific indicators. 13 years ago, the City of Ekurhuleni began tracking its wetlands, and very recently, they're now using the Circular 88 requirements, sustainability indicators that have been released by National Treasury. And according to these indicators, the city is saying that they're doing pretty well in this rehabilitation process. The other information that they've been using to track progress is water monitoring programs, and there's the information coming from these programs indicates if the flood levels in the city are declining. And if that's the case, then it's clear that this process is working and they'll continue to do it. And some of the reflections that have been shared with us by the officials involved in this project is that even something as simple as smell, right? If the wetland doesn't smell, then that means it's improving. And that's something that one should consider as an indicator of success in rehabilitating the wetland. I personally think that the efforts that the city is taking to rehabilitate this wetland is quite encouraging. And given that this wetland is one of the largest in Southern Africa and the only one in Gauteng, I think it's quite important for us as citizens to, help the city in whatever ways we can in how they can tackle this water hyacinth and finding different methods. We've shared with you what they're looking at doing, what they've done, but I think if anyone on this call has seen anything interesting or knows of things that the city could try and apply, please do share that with us. And of course, we'll share that through with the city. The full details of these case studies will be available as well on our website. That's sacities.net. So please do subscribe to our mailing list, and we can keep you updated on what the different cities are doing when it comes to innovative approaches to sustainability practices. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lebo. And again, it's amazing because I wasn't aware of this, and I would have looked at those beautiful plants. I'm sure Nikki yourself too, unless you're more knowledgeable on these sort of dangerous plants. And I would have said, let's have more of it to beautify the space. So thank you for sort of blowing our minds again. And making us more aware of invasive species and the efforts. I think sometimes, myself included, we can become quite negative around the lack of progress in the environmental space, especially with the amount of social media posts that are up. But it's good to see that there are cities that are tackling some of their biggest challenges, and there are people committed to these projects on a daily basis. I'm going to hand over to Nicolette Pingo, who will be moderating this session. Looking at how affordable housing can do more than just help us achieve our spatial justice goals, but can also result in compact cities, which cut costs for government and have all sorts of other benefits and efficiencies. Nikki, hopefully you're in a decent Wi-Fi connection and ready to go.
Can you hear me? Apologies for all the technical issues. Eskom has really been against me today, and apologies for any background noise. But really, I wanted to welcome everyone to the session today. And thank you again, Rashik, for leading us thus far. I think it sets a really nice basis for a discussion around sustainability and affordable housing. And before we get into the wonderful webinar with our panelists, I just want to highlight some of the reasons why we thought that this was an important webinar to have as part of our series. So I think the one critical component that we must remember as we listen to our wonderful panelists today is that affordable housing is really housing for the majority in South Africa, where we do have around 55% of our population living below the upper bound poverty line of around 1,200 Rand a month. So the way in which we're going to rebuild our cities is really for the majority and in that affordable housing bracket. The second thing is that this really calls for us to utilize our existing resources as well as we can. And I think, as we'll see from our panelists today, that affordable housing has been somewhat in the forefront of already leading that movement of really maximizing resources. And there's two important ways in which they've really done this. The first is really contribution to densification and compact cities, specifically in our historic CBDs, but also in our townships, which we'll also chat about today. And compact cities is about justice now and opportunities and access to multiple resources, but it's also about the future sustainability of our cities and future use of our resources. So it's also justice for our future generations, which I think is really important. And then the second thing we'll see is some of the innovative technologies and mechanisms that the affordable housing systems are using in their developments. So now over to our wonderful panel. Today, we're very lucky to have a panel of 4 people who are very well experienced in the affordable housing as well as the sustainability space. So we have Karel Kleinans. He is the CEO of Diversity Fund, and they have been really an integral developer, particularly in the inner city of Johannesburg, with one of their flagship projects, Jewel City. We also have Karabella Pule. Karabella is the general manager for NASHO, the National Association of Social Housing Organizations, and he also comes with a wealth of experience in implementing both social and affordable housing. We have Georgina Smith next, really from the green perspective, and I think it's really important, as often green infrastructure can seem quite remote and expensive and elite. That we bring her into the conversation around affordable housing. And then at the end of the session, we will also be bringing in Catherine Cox. And Catherine is from the Trust for Urban Housing Finance, and she will tell us specifically around work in affordable housing around backyard dwellings and township densification. So we really do have a wonderful panel today. And how we'll start with our panel discussion is we're just going to ask each of our panelists to give us some insights into this interesting topic. And we'll start with Karel. So Karel, over to you. If you can tell us a little bit about Diversity and also some of your wonderful wealth of knowledge and experience in this field. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Nikki. I just want to check that you can hear me all right.
Yes, thanks, Karel.
Great. If you'll just give me a second, I just want to share my screen. Here we go. And can you see that as well?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Great. Okay, cool. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to try and very briefly just kind of give a bit of our perspective on these questions, because we think they're very important and they really cut to the core of why we do what we do as Diversity. And then I look forward to hearing from the other panelists and also the discussion that'll follow. So just very briefly, we are Diversity. We primarily develop affordable housing precincts in mostly the Johannesburg CBD to date, but also looking at projects in other areas. We presently own and manage just under 7,000 affordable residential apartments, quite a bit of commercial and retail space as well that is mostly serving the housing community that we've built. So this would be like shops, schools, as you can see pictured here in one of these pictures, clinics, gyms, retail amenities, etc. And we kind of do everything in-house. We've got an internalized property asset and development management function, and just kind of listed below here for what it's worth a couple of the partners that we work with. Some of, kind of, we're very happy to have some really bright kind of property minds on our board, and that we count as shareholders of the business. So we are a fully for-profit business, to be clear, but we really care on a deep level about kind of advancing spatial justice in our cities through the work we do. Let me just see how I can skip along here. So just to kind of recap at least two of the three questions that were put to us as panelists, and I'd like to address these two specifically. The first being, how has and how can affordable housing contribute to developing more compact and sustainable South African cities? And the second being, what are the barriers to being able to do that? So on the first question, how can affordable housing contribute to building more compact cities and sustainable cities? It really needs to be appreciated that our cities are primarily housing. So if you drive down the highway and you look out the window, what you will see is mostly residential property. Yes, there are shopping centers and there are office blocks and there are churches and government buildings and schools and other kinds of uses as well. But really, if you were to look at what occupies space within our cities, even just looking at it on Google Maps, you will find that cities are by and large residential property. So if you're not getting housing right in both form and its sustainability, etc., then you really are not fully addressing, or you're going to not be able to really make a big impact. And just to kind of illustrate this point, what you can see over here are stats that I've showed another couple of places. So sorry if you've seen the slide before, but this is just the stats essay reported building plan approvals by per square meter by type of property or type of use for 2019 and 2020. So you can see obviously 2020 a bit lower due to COVID. But what you can see here is, if you look at the right-hand side here being offices and retail, and there's kind of like an other category as well that's so small that it doesn't really even feature on this graph, and that would be, civic uses, etc. The residential component of this completely dwarfs retail and offices. And I show this to say, how can affordable housing contribute to compact and sustainable cities? Well, it is our cities are affordable housing, essentially. So if you get affordable housing right, if you get it compact and you get it sustainable, then it follows that your cities will be compact and sustainable. So it's a subtle point, but I think it's an often underappreciated one. This is our present reality in South Africa at the moment. The reality is that, and we can talk for a long time about how this came about and why this is the case, and there's some very good reasons why we ended up here, but the reality is that the vast majority of South Africans live in a sprawling urban form that looks quite similar to this. And again, I've made this point many times before, but the reality is that between where people live at the moment, which is typically on the edges of our cities, quite far away from economic activity, and where they work every day, there's a huge cost to society. This cost is measured in time people are losing while commuting to and from work. It's lost in money because it's really expensive. People are spending up to a third of their income just on transport costs alone. And then there's also a massive environmental dimension to this. And I think this point is recognized and implied in the framing of the question, saying, how can we achieve more compact and sustainable cities? I think it's generally recognized and understood that more compact urban form is more sustainable. And Georgina, who's speaking after me, will touch on some research that we recently did in partnership with the GBCSA that really just seeks to kind of understand this question a bit more, and she'll share the findings, so not to spoil the punchline for her, but it really is, what we all understand anecdotally certainly is true when you start looking at it critically in a quantitative way. So this is what it looks like at the moment, and this is what it looks like when, in my view, you don't get affordable housing entirely right. Not to take away from the fact that we have been delivering housing, and we've been managing to deliver housing at a very impressive rate through government-led programs in South Africa compared to other developing countries. Unfortunately, it is manifesting in a manner that where the urban form isn't actually compact or sustainable. And so this is our present reality. As diversity, and it's not to say that, we're doing, everyone should be doing what we're doing, but just to illustrate that this is an alternative, this is the precinct that Nikki referred to in her intro, and thank you for that, Nikki. This is called Jewel City. It's in downtown Joburg. It's a couple of city blocks that Diversity owns, and we've redeveloped it into a mixed use and kind of residential accommodation heavy precinct. So what you can see here is a kind of an example of what the streetscape looks like. It's fully pedestrianized. It's safe. It's secure. Kids can play in the area. You've got activated street edges with retail on the ground floors and kind of all the amenities that you need to live a good and functional life. And then above that, you can see as is pictured here, we've got apartment buildings, and in this precinct we've got over 2,000 kind of affordable apartments. So the point is just to say, this is possible. We're not doing this with grant money. We are not doing this with, donations or CSI or government funding or anything. This is fully for profit. It is a sustainable business model. We are scaling it up a lot. We intend to do many more projects like this. And the point is just to say, this is viable. Obviously, this is viable for people who are earning a formal income. I should say that, and not even a formal income, let's say a regular income, because we've got a lot of informal traders and people living with us who are informally employed, but they can demonstrate that they have stable income, and therefore we are able to house them. So this doesn't solve and obviously that is not the reality for many South Africans, right? So we've got a shocking and horrifying homelessness problem. And as a business, we are not able to, with private sector money, solve that problem at the moment, right? It's capital intensive, and that is where I think government has an important role to play. But at least for everyone who is earning a regular income, there is an alternative to this picture over here, which looks more like this. And in my view, if you can do this, then you are achieving more sustainable and dense urban form. And that kind of goes to an answer to the question that was posed by this panel or by the session. Just very briefly, I'll show you kind of what it looks like inside. Just to say, these aren't like residential dormitories or depressing spaces. They can actually be very like pleasant places to live, and our tenants, I believe, are very happy they're. I mean, they're voting with their feet. None is forcing to them to stay there, but there is huge demand for this product. Just a couple more pictures of kind of what these apartments look like. Cool. So the point is, this is possible, right? So to the second question, what are the challenges and why is this not happening? This is a really difficult question to answer, and and these certainly aren't the only reasons, and they're also not. They can all be debated at length, but from my perspective at least, and again, this is not casting blame on anyone, it's just to say that a reality is that RDP and BNG, as it manifested over the last 25 years, has enabled sprawl, and it is very difficult to move away from that. So the dominant mode of affordable housing delivery is in a sprawling fashion, because we went to the edges of cities and started basically doing township establishment, rezoning agricultural land to residential, and typically Res 1. And essentially we rolled out infrastructure that facilitates sprawling urban form. And for I guess the first half or so of this last 25 years, that really was primarily government-led. But then at a stage, the private sector got involved as well and really started essentially land manufacturing for profit for government. And it's been massively profitable for many private developers, where they would buy up farms, rezone, service the land, and sell those service lands back to government, and then build the top structures for them. And this whole kind of way of kind of going about affordable housing, which is a function of policy, the infrastructure investment regime, and also just kind of path dependency from where we started, resulted in a lot of housing, and actually the majority of housing looking like that first picture I showed you. A second point, which is complex, but it must be recognized, is the bulk services and utilities charges regime in the country. So as you know, you will hear every time there's a discussion on Eskom and, you know, on the Eskom debt profile, you'll hear that no one in Soweto pays for electricity. Right now, this is a fact, and we can, this is a very interesting debate around whether that is, you know, socially justified or not. It may very well be, but the reality is that for as long as it is electricity and water, and to a degree rates and taxes is free at the urban periphery, but it is charged in the urban core, as it is for anyone who lives in one of our properties, as is pictured here. There is a many hundred rands a month incentive to rather live on the urban edge. So even though people recognize that they have a lower quality of life because they're commuting back and from work, they have no time to spend with their kids, they're being accosted as women, you know, in public transport, and all these various kind of social issues. There's this whole environmental dimension. People recognize all of this, but at the end of the day, they're like, okay, but also I'm not spending 400 Rand a month on water and electricity if I can get it for free out there. So I'm going to accept this time cost, etc. As a result. So the point is, it's a real impediment to achieving density, because density, unfortunately, this building that's pictured in the background here cannot be built, in my view, informally, right? Or like by individual households. It's a 450 million Rand building, and it takes 18 months to construct. So it's just not, the dense urban form requires a degree of formality for it to manifest at all. Like to just build a building like that requires formality. And when you have formality, then you can't get out of, at least in the present reality South Africa, you have to pay for water and electricity. And then you're at let's say, an economic disadvantage to the informal alternative. So that is part of why, that is partly an impediment to achieving density. It just is a fact. And then the final point here, which is, you know, been discussed ad nauseum, so I won't kind of say too much about it here, is there is a degree of neglect in terms of infrastructure, maintenance, and service delivery of our kind of well-located urban areas. There are many interesting reasons for this, but it is a fact, and that too is an impediment to further densification of our cities. So I think that's me. I hope that provides some impetus to these two questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carol, for that. I think your first point can play a role in lifting. Apologies for the noise here. I'm going to hand over to Georgina. I recognize some wonderful questions in the chat, and we'll get to them after we've given all of the panelists an opportunity to come in.
Thanks, Nikki. Hi, everyone. It's Georgina from the GBCSA here. I head up the tech team at the Green Building Council of South Africa. I'm just going to pop my presentation on. Thank you to Rashik and to the Urban Festival for the invite. And also to Carol for raising some of the points that I'm going to carry on chatting about. Nikki, can you see my screen? I'm just going to make it full screen. Okay.
Yes, I can. Thanks so much, Georgina.
Okay, cool. I think I'm going to stop my video just to help with the bandwidth. Okay. So hi everyone. I'm going to chat a bit about affordable housing, but more from the perspective of the green building movement, and if we had to view the delivery of affordable housing through a green lens, how it could help drive and contribute towards delivering more sustainable cities. I'm conscious that not everyone knows who GBCSA is. I've had a look at the participants list, and there are quite a few names that I don't recognize. So just to give you a kind of brief overview, we are an NPO, and our purpose really is to advocate for sustainability and the green building movement within South Africa. Africa. It is obviously focused on sustainable development, so acknowledging that development is required to deliver hospitals and schools and, you know, housing that is safe, that's healthy, but at the same time, we need to do this within the limits and the balance of the earth. So we started in about 2007, and we're also a member of the World Green Building Council. Our roots are really in very commercial office kind of real estate. And so some of you might have engaged with the GBCSA from that perspective. But from about 2014, 2015, we started engaging a lot more in the residential sector. And I'm going to go into, you know, some of the kind of project examples in a little while. But the GBCSA believes strongly that, you know, we don't want to leave any building behind in South Africa. So it's not just about, you know, the flashy kind of office buildings. It's really about bringing green and an understanding of green to all South Africans. And we have seen that. There's been a massive interest in the last year. And we think it was actually, you know, obviously also motivated by COVID, but with everybody working from home, you know, people weren't in an office anymore that was nicely kind of conditioned or well ventilated. People started really looking at their homes to say, well, you know, how well is this building built? And, you know, how healthy is it? How well insulated is it? How can I make improvements? And we've seen a massive interest from the residential consumer market around green buildings and around making their buildings healthy as well, which obviously speaks to green. So, you know, we support the market in various ways. I've mentioned that we advocate. And really, this is about partnership, about collaboration. I think what's really fabulous about the kind of green industry, the green building movement, is it's incredibly collaborative. I think, you know, people recognize, yes, there's competition, but at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want to see more green buildings out there, actually implemented, actually delivered. And so it's a common goal that unites. We also, you know, assist with training, and that's really about helping everyone understand what green buildings are about. So, for example, we have supported a lot of public sector training where different members from government, both at local, provincial, and national government, you know, have gone through green building training. And, you know, the feedback that we got was very positive, and they were very successful training initiatives. And this is where most of you might be familiar with the Green Building Council and your engagement with us, is we certify green buildings. So what that means is we verify that when a developer says, yes, this development is green, we have a framework and they've got to submit documentation to us, and we verify that, yes, their claims of green are actually valid. And that's how we try and prevent greenwashing. And so that's, you know, a key role, and the property market has kind of, you know, taken that up. And there's also increasingly links to, if your building is certified, and I'll chat a bit about that as well, you then have access to different financial products. And I think that also speaks to some of the challenges that that Carl raised. And so the building in the back, it's not Tshwane House. This is the Department of Environmental Affairs, or DFFE as they're now called. It's their head office up in Pretoria. They've got a 6-star rating. Very interesting, good passive design that they use to really optimize their energy efficiency. And then they've got solar installed as well. Maybe so just to let you know, in case you don't know, we have over 750 buildings in South Africa that have received a green building certification of sorts. So it might not be 750 buildings, because one building might get a rating or a verification at a design stage. So that's just at the concept, at the blueprint stage. And then they'll also get a rating when it's actually built, because, you know, a lot happens between what your plan is and what your vision is to when a contractor is actually on board and you're on site and you can't get the right materials. But here's some nice examples. You can see in the top left-hand corner, this is a great building. This is a Sonke House. It's the Department of Public Works in KZN. an office block for, for a government department, but super low key in terms of technology, but really smart in terms of passive design and looking at, good insulation, thermal mass, the right orientation, and then optimizing efficiencies like that. The building at the bottom is down in Cape Town. It's called the Ridge. Really interesting architectural design, and the first building in South Africa to actually use timber, in a structural component. It's used in the facade, and also got a 6-star and very interesting kind of design to optimize natural ventilation, which is quite unusual in South Africa. But I think the point I want to make here is we have examples, and we've got a big collective knowledge bank of green buildings in South Africa, and these are actual projects. These are not, kind of ideas, that kind of sit on the shelf. These are projects that are being implemented on the ground. I think many of you would agree and understand and appreciate that green buildings speak to many of our sustainable development goals, our SDGs, and help move the agenda of several of those. And, green buildings in effect help deal with building climate resiliency. So for example, if you look at your building and it's well designed and you've thought about how you can carefully thermally insulate the building, if temperatures increase, the building will be better able to deal with that temperature increase, and you won't necessarily have to go and put in, a kind of split unit to then deal with an uncomfortable indoor temperature. So that's a very simple example. An example that all of the Cape Townians would be familiar with is if you have thought about water reuse and water harvesting. Okay, obviously the rainwater wouldn't really apply, but when we're talking about grey water, when you have periods of drought, you are then better able to deal with supply constraints. And obviously, when we talk about Eskom, I don't even need to state the obvious of how a building that could have its own supply would be beneficial. So just some thoughts, some perspectives about how, if affordable housing is delivered in a green way, how it contributes towards a sustainable city. Many of you might already have this on your radar, but the green building movement is on this big drive to reach these two really big goals around net zero carbon. We want to make sure that by 2030, all of our new builds are designed to be net zero carbon. So what that means is that over a year, over 12 months, there is a net effect of carbon associated with the operational energy use of a building. And that by 2050, all buildings, and that includes the existing stock, which is massive, is net zero carbon. And this is in line with kind of science-based targets in order for us to reach our, 1.5 degree threshold, as per the Paris Agreement. Some of you might be aware that our 4 major metros actually signed up to the net zero 2030 new build target. So this was part of a new buildings program. It just ended this year, and GBCSA provided kind of collaborative support. But in effect, all 4 cities got funding to have an individual to look at how they could reach this, and are in various processes of developing a bylaw that will help new buildings. And that obviously speaks to the graph that Carl showed around, the square meterage associated with new builds. And that stat would then be informed by this target. Looking at this slide, you can see the residential component is obviously significant. So we know the built environment obviously contributes significantly to carbon emissions. Yes, it's part of the problem. It is also part of the solution. So there's a massive opportunity in the built environment being a significant solutions-based strategy for mitigating carbon emissions. So this is just a little bit of a summary, and I can also pop this link in the chat box. But I mean, interestingly, eThekwini, since this publication has actually come out with a rebate policy. So if you are building according to green standards, you will actually get an incentive, in effect, on your monthly property taxes. So just to give you an idea of where cities are moving and the kind of positive stories around ensuring sustainability is integrated into city placemaking. Here's another example of a net zero carbon project. So we've got about 20 of them in South Africa. Interestingly, the Green Building Council was one of the first GBCs globally to develop a net zero scheme, and we were really, proudly South African in terms of contributing very strongly to quite a global movement. And that was about 3 or 4 years ago. But just to let you know that there are examples of net zero carbon buildings in South Africa, but we don't have it at scale yet. So we've got about 22 projects, about 10 of them are carbon, and then the others speak to things like water or waste or ecology. We know that green buildings contribute significantly to health and well-being. So this is a function of the amount of fresh air that you're bringing into a building. Are you letting nice natural daylight in? What are your acoustics like? Are you installing carpets and glues and kind of furniture that are made from toxic materials that, off gas in a way that you're not even aware or conscious of? Or have you actually, made sure that your materials and products have been responsibly sourced so that you're not inhaling any kind of toxic products? Do you have access to a view that looks outside onto some form of nature, or do you have indoor plants? And I mean, there's several studies that have demonstrated that, buildings can very much affect, your health and well-being. So, that's not really a disputed fact anymore, but it also looks at how productive you are. And so when we're thinking about working from home and creating spaces for learning for students, whether, and that doesn't matter which income group you're in, these are factors that need to be taken into account. And then we need to start considering, what is the cost of not going green? So I think, Nikki, you raised the point around, green buildings being seen as, either elite or unaffordable. And yes, that's a question we get asked a lot. And I think it's a really important one. We have been investigating the costs of going green since about 2009, and we've got 2 very interesting studies that look at local data to understand what the cost premium is associated with going green. The research is very kind of office, commercial, retail based. We do have evidence back from, local residential developers that indicate that the cost premium of going green, more from a resource efficiency perspective, so that's, just kind of a focus on energy and water and embodied carbon, is less than 1% than the capital cost, or the capex associated with the project. But the kind of question to ask yourself is, what is the cost of not going green when one thinks about climate change and the future anticipated changes? And how will you then need to increase your costs in maintaining that building that has not been adequately future-proofed? And how will that translate into costs for homeowners? And then increasingly what we're finding, and this has already happened in South Africa, we are finding that green certified buildings are being linked to financial products. So there might be a preferential lending rate. So for example, there are residential units associated with Borman, they're a residential developer, that have better lending rates. And that's been a first for South Africa, and there are other products that are coming out in a similar vein. So that's, and fundamentally it's around saying, the bank views it from the perspective of saying, because this homeowner will in effect be in a position to save on energy and water, they are viewed then as a less risky client, so to speak. So in terms of greening affordable housing, it's typically done through EDGE, and I'm just sharing this with you now so that in case you haven't heard the terminology, you understand what it is. It's developed by the IFC, and in effect, it looks at a building and you get an EDGE certification if you have proven that your building uses 20% less energy, 20% less water, and 20% less embodied energy against a baseline. From an energy perspective, it's based on sand. So, your building has to perform better than what is legally required, when you build it. And in terms of water and embodied energy, there are both local industry and global benchmarks that are used where there is a lack of local data. So just to give you a feel for kind of affordable housing, and EDGE deals a lot, it's across any income, but we have a significant portion of EDGE projects that deal in the affordable housing space. So we've had about 79 projects that have been registered in South Africa to date. About 45 of them have received a prelim certification. So that means that it's kind of still at design stage. And then we've got 26 that have actually been built. They are out there, people are living in them, and they are performing at these metrics. And I think it's just always useful to know that there are actual project examples out there. This is not policy. These are not, kind of feasibility studies that still need, 2 years to be put into practice. This is action. This is climate, change mitigation in action. And I just wanted to kind of share the Belhar Gardens project, because it was the first affordable housing project in South Africa that got EDGE certified. They demonstrated, 41% energy saving. There were about 630 units, and they did this through measures like, decreasing their window to wall ratio. Instead of using conventional geysers, they used heat pump technology, which resulted in about up to about a 48 to 50% saving on their energy consumption associated with hot water production, which in a residential perspective is significant, because in a home, your hot water typically as a standard measurement accounts for 40% of your electricity bill. And the kind of feedback from tenants has been incredibly positive on this. I'm just going to go, to the slide. I'll drop this link in the chat, but go and have a look at this video. It's really great. Actually, the BBC selected this project as one of, I think it was about 20 projects globally that they showcased. But I think what's important from this video that I noticed was really, it was how the kind of green design, the focus on affordable housing, how that translated into and affected the design thinking, and the kind of solutions and the problem solving approach. Because in effect, it focused on energy, it focused on, savings on utilities, which was significant. So the family that is interviewed landed up saving about 1,000 Rand a month, which was a significant monthly saving for that household unit that then could be used on food or buying, I think school shoes for kids. But in the end, it wasn't just about the savings on electricity and water. It was around the fact that the development had been thinking about green over and beyond the EDGE scope, and had delivered, security. There was a park that kids could play in, and simple kind of design initiatives around building the park and in the middle of a quad, so that you've got eyes and surveillance and kind of inbuilt safety for the community. There were kind of veggie gardens, and space for veggie gardens was included. So those kind of things really contributed to the quality of the space, and that had a really significant impact on the community and the individuals who actually lived there. The question was, how does going green for a development make a community change? And, how does this make children look at a place in which they live differently? And the feedback was really positive. Then something else to share, we're kind of moving on from project examples, and Carl touched on this. GBC and diversity, obviously there's a kind of similarity in understanding and appreciating that we want to deliver quality spaces, we want to support built environment professionals and the market in understanding what what are the best factors and what are the most important factors to consider when going green. And we're always looking to partner with stakeholders in generating that kind of knowledge for decision makers to say, okay, listen, this is really highlights why I should go green, or this allows me to make a decision at this point of going green. And one of the kind of conversations we started having was, we know that your location is important, and you can see a lot of development keeps on happening on the urban periphery as opposed to within the urban core. We understand that there are environmental impacts, but we then ask, has anybody actually quantified that? And there were some studies, but most of them were global. And so we thought that there would definitely be value in looking at a quantitative study that looks at the impact of housing location on specifically carbon emissions as the environmental metric. And we chose Johannesburg, as the case study. And this slide you would have already seen from Carl, maybe just to reiterate, obviously, why, we wanted to focus on this and also really look at the residential sector, because that is where the majority of new build is happening. And I think, Carl's already touched on how affordable housing fits into that. And so the study basically did a carbon analysis, which is often called a life cycle assessment or life cycle analysis. That kind of considers the whole process from start to end. But then we also added lifestyle associated emissions, because in effect, you've got your building and the kind of carbon that goes into it. Then the user is in that building for about 60 years and they're switching lights on and plugging their laptops in, and you're looking at operational energy. But fundamentally, they're also then locked into a position or a location, and that then informs the resultant carbon emissions associated with transport. So it looked at the total location emissions, and that's quite novel in terms of the study and its outputs. And so I'm not going to go through the results in detail. This report is on our website, and Carl's going to be unpacking it in a lot more detail at our convention. But yeah, sorry, this is the full life cycle analysis. So just to reiterate what I said, we obviously had to make a lot of assumptions. We, set the study up to have two different families in different incomes. So there was a low income family and a medium income family, and they were located, within the urban core and then within the urban periphery. And we obviously did make, quite stark assumptions around access to opportunities within the urban core versus the periphery. Obviously within the urban core, it was assumed to be significantly more. But to give you, the results at a glance, you could very quickly see from this graph that travel is a significant portion, particularly when you're looking at the periphery. So, travel is between 49 and 65 in the periphery. So you can see the two green on the right versus a range of 24 to 39 on the, within the urban core. The makeup was really interesting. So we could obviously see that travel was significant. We could see that operational energy was really important. And then the embodied carbon. So just to reiterate, that's the carbon associated with the actual material. So the carbon that goes into making the bricks or the insulation was really interesting because it is significant when you just compare it to the operational energy. And as built environment professionals, and that's the kind of scope that we fall within typically, this is what architects, engineers, kind of have control over, is the operational element and the embodied carbon element. Whereas the location, which impacts the travel, is more a developer, client, finances kind of decision and discussion that needs to be had. But so what was interesting, we then, extrapolated the data out into the future. And in effect, what the findings were is that, if we carry on with this trajectory of building housing all on the periphery as opposed to, exploring opportunities within the urban core. We're going to increase the carbon emissions by almost 10 times of what the total annual emissions of Joburg are in 2016, which is, that's putting a number, an order of magnitude, obviously with modeling, there are always caveats and, and assumptions that might change, but it's around understanding an order of magnitude, getting a feel for the scale of what are we locking ourselves into if we don't think about where we locate housing more carefully and more critically. And then these are obviously some of the qualitative issues, and some of these have already been raised around understanding, when you locate, housing in the urban core, it's obviously closer to service vehicles. It's better served by physical infrastructure. And those are some of the qualitative things that we didn't look at from a detailed perspective, but obviously play into the debate we're having today. So thank you. That's it from me. I look forward to your questions and the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Georgina, for such an incredibly rich presentation. I think you really highlighted for us the cost of not looking at sustainable ways of building affordable housing. And I also think your wonderful example of the Madula Moho case study project in Cape Town, Balhe, really is a wonderful introduction to Karabelo and the work of the National Association of Social Housing Organizations. So really, really fantastic presentation, Georgina. I see such interesting, in-depth questions coming through. I can't wait for us to get to the question section. But for now, really looking forward to hearing from Karabelo from a social housing perspective in particular. Over to you, Karabelo.
Again, thank you. Thank you, Nikki, and sort of my co-panelists as well. Yeah, man, we're really privileged and excited to be here and share a bit about social housing and NASHO. As per the introduction, my name is Karabelo Poe, and I'm the General Manager at the National Association for Social Housing. So we are a not-for-profit organization. We're a member-based organization, and we represent the views of our members, and we, I guess, do research and advocacy around social housing. Maybe I must just put a quick disclaimer. Apologies for the dark. I'm sort of running on load shedding. So, and if there's any background noise, it's just to enable me to present. So yeah, very briefly, I think, yeah, definitely maybe just to pick up on the earlier presentation, just around green building and specifically the Belhau project from Madula Moho. So that's a project in Cape Town by one of NASHO's members, a social housing institution that's based both in Johannesburg as well as in Cape Town. So what is social housing, right? And really how does it fit within the conversation? So it's very briefly, social housing is a rental and cooperative housing option for low income persons, built at a level of scale and build form. And more importantly, happening in very specific restructuring zones, right? So social housing can't be anywhere and everywhere, and it has to be of a certain form for social housing to happen. And it's also delivered by very specific registered social housing institutions, or alternatively, a project is registered by or a project itself is accredited. So just to explain the role that social housing plays within perhaps the housing ladder or within the rental market, Carol spoke quite a bit that, from a diversity perspective, they're very clear in the market that they operate in. You must obviously earn some sort of income, whether formal or informal. So this next slide is really to kind of show the different possibilities within the rental market. So no fixed income, and typically those, that space is occupied by the informal rental market, emergency housing, transitional housing. Then we come to the low income market area. Let me just get my laser rather, there we go. Then there's low income, and that's people probably paying a rental of anything, sort of between 350 to 700. And that takes us to low to middle income. And this is really where part of the space that social housing operates in, right? So the rentals within social housing ranging anything from 600 rands to 4,800. And equally so, this is also sort of a space that affordable housing players also operate in. I guess with a strong caveat that social housing would go slightly lower down market as compared to for-profit property developers and on market. And yeah, obviously thereafter you would look at the middle to high income as well as the high income market. So very briefly, yeah, I guess, practically the target for social housing within our economy is persons earning and gross income of anything between 1,500 rands to 15,000, and our rental ranges from 650 rands to about 4,500, depending obviously on demand and supply in that particular town. But very critically, just to address, how social housing would fit and why the program exists from a government perspective, right? So critically, no different to how other government programs in human settlements operate. It's really a response to market failures, right? In the provision of very well located, affordable rental accommodation, in particular for the low and middle income families in South Africa. And very practically, what the program really wants to achieve, among other objectives, is to enable a karabelo or anybody out there earning between those rental income and create an opportunity for them to be closer to economic opportunities in a safe and secure environment, while paying far more affordable rentals. And really, that's really emphasized when you look at the different possible rental income. So somebody earning 1,500 to 3,500, on average would be paying a rental of 650 rands in a very well located area or in very well located urban city. So in Johannesburg, that could be literally anything from the CBD, it could be Kempton Park, it must be Sandton, it must be Morningside in KZN, and perhaps even the city bowels and any other sort of luxurious areas within our city. So it plays a very imperative role in spatial justice and economic and social justice within the affordable or within the rental market in South Africa specifically. Very briefly, I guess the next slide, just to really illustrate the importance and the restructuring importance of social housing. So what you're looking at here is, I guess, a typical sort of South African town with a CBD in the center, where historically, I guess Black people and were not predominantly staying there or allowed, and you have a transit corridor, urban hub, and in the periphery of the metro, typically where the townships are located, and people really have to commute between their informal settlements or their marginalized periphery townships to economic opportunities in the center. And that's really what the social housing program intends or was formed for, to move people from the periphery into closer to economic opportunities with very specific spatial and economic and social justice imperatives. So within the theme of this webinar and questions asked, right? So how can social housing or affordable housing contribute to compact cities? And also very briefly, and I'm hoping we can unpack it more as we go into the Q&A, the different barriers to unlock large-scale housing in the cities. I think without a doubt, we've sort of explained, the policy imperatives and instruments around integration. How else will we get, a single mother of two earning 5,000 Rand to move away from, or give her an opportunity to move from Alex and live closer to economic opportunities, or move away from, Tembisa in Gauteng and any other townships where they are commuting for, long hours at high cost as well, as explained earlier by Carl. And one of those instruments is definitely social housing, but also, easier access to economic integration and economic opportunities is quite critical to contributing to compact cities. From a policy perspective, I think it's also important just to emphasize that social housing must only happen in very specific areas where it meets the, it restructures the urban layout and brings people to economic opportunities, as explained earlier. But I guess, through the discussions, I'm hoping we can also then unpack the different, barriers. But I think my colleagues have definitely spoken, or my fellow panelists have spoken to them. But without a doubt, access to very well located land is a big barrier to, to unlocking large scale housing in our cities, and in particular for social housing. The role of municipalities and government, it goes without saying, especially these times, that the cost of utilities is high. So what would be the benefit of, or how great would it be if we bring people from the townships into the urban areas? They're still paying good rent for 650, 1,000 Rand, but the utilities are still costing them a whole 1,000 Rand per month. It just be, 1 foot forward and 1 foot back. Just also critically as a barrier to entry, and this applies through society as well as the different layers of government, just understanding really what social housing is, right, as an instrument for urban regeneration and urban restructuring, and how to use that, to enable, better cities, more compact cities, where there is better integration, especially given, sort of the history of South Africa. And that'll be my opening remarks and slides. Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks so much. I think that cities as a program together with institutions and in a role in restructuring, which I think is really, really an important component. I know we're all itching to get to the discussion, and we're just coming through, and comments, please keep them coming. I appreciate some responses from the panelists to individual questions as well. But I would like to give an opportunity to Catherine Cox from the Trust for Urban Housing Finance. There has been some questions about financing affordable housing and green affordable housing in particular. So I think from a financing institution, it'll be great to hear from her. But also, I think we cannot speak about affordable housing without speaking about informal dwellings, and in particular, backyard dwellings. So over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Nikki. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I can't see.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Nikki. So as Nikki said, I'm from TUF, part of TUF 21, which is also part of the TUF group. I'll speak to you mostly about Umastandi today, which is our the financing arm that we have specifically in townships. But just to say that TUF traditionally has financed over the last 18 years in the city environments experiencing urban decay and decline. And really what TUF's business is creating or financing property entrepreneurs with an affordable housing outcome. So that's the main focus of TUF. And we've translated that and seen a need in South African townships nationally to support the upgrade of a backyard rental stock to deliver compliant and quality, affordable rental housing in township environments. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Got a very quick presentation. Can everyone see that?
It's just coming on. We're nearly there, Catherine.
Sorry. Can you see it? Anything happening?
Not yet on my side.
Okay.
Can others see? Sorry, tech and electricity has not been on our side.
I know.
Today.
We have load shedding here as well.
all.
Okay, it's fine. I wanted to show you some examples of some of the work you're doing, but anyway, I'll just speak
We
to
can
it.
see it now.
Can you see it?
Yes.
All good. Okay, so as I was saying, Umastandi finances the development of quality and compliant backyard, not necessarily only backyard, but affordable rental housing in township environments. And essentially, it speaks to all of the kind of sustainable development principles and infill development. I think, sorry, I'm just battling to go down. Okay, there we go. So it's a pretty new program. We've been in operation since 2018 and had, I think, a really good impact since then, not without its trickiness, but I think it's been really well received. We're working in 17 townships across South Africa and looking to expand into new ones within the next few months. As I said, it's part of the TOUGH group. And I wanted to talk a bit about the impact logic. So really, TOUGH 21 and Umastandi is all about impact and what impact are we having on our urban environments. And as Carl and Carabello and Georgina were saying, it's really about trying to drive sustainability and at the same time trying to allow people to have better access to economic opportunity and to create their own personal agency economically. So the impact we're having through Umastandi is entrepreneurial growth, financing entrepreneurs, and giving people who traditionally wouldn't have access to finance, that access is really key for us. That's a really important part of trying to deliver affordable housing. We're also looking at or creating local economic development. So I think in the delivery of affordable housing, the value chain is really important and creates enormous opportunity for local economic development, both in the delivery of housing, in the construction phase, but also upstream in the manufacturing phase. And this has spin-offs into job creation, massive job creation, and also skills development, which we are actively involved in, running training programs around financial literacy and in property development and property management. Also, as everyone has been speaking to, urban densification, so it's primarily about infill development, improving the fiscal impact for local government. So we calculate that on an annual basis, and it's incredible to see the amount of positive fiscal impact that the projects have when grouped together on a larger basis. And really also speaking to TOUGH's urban land reform and transformation agenda. So I know our CEO always says to transfer or change the complexion of ownership in our cities. So I think Umastandi really believes in the ordinary person and in their ability to change the urban environment and to deliver affordable housing. And we approach this on a massive small basis. So rather than sort of financing mega projects, which as Carl was explaining are often on the outskirts of urban areas. We focus on the many small and medium-sized developers who we can finance, throughout the projects, throughout townships, throughout inner cities. And when those small and medium-sized projects add up, it becomes quite significant in terms of scale and impact. Just an example of a typical township. This one happens to be vacant, but they aren't always there. But it's just we'll finance in normal townships. That is before and after. So this is the kind of thing that some of our clients, and particularly the micro developers, are delivering. Most of the, I can't say most, but some of the projects are smaller than this. Some of them are this size, and you'll see in the next slide the kind of interior on the side there. And to give you an idea of the impact we've had to date, so we've delivered 445 new affordable housing units into township environments, created or backed the development of 25 successful new property entrepreneurs, trained over 1,000 people in financial literacy and property development. So it just gives you an idea of where we're headed. And also just picking up on the contribution to sustainability, I think most of these points have been covered, so I'm not going to go over them again. Just to speak to delivery challenges for affordable housing in townships, I would say the biggest challenge really is access to finance, and one that we're continually working on, trying to overcome, looking at different models, different kinds of pricing, how we can make it more and more accessible to ordinary people. I think another barrier is the skills, and as I said, we're involved in significant amounts of training around financial literacy and property development. Utility costs and the whole culture around paying for utilities and the impact that has for the city. I think that is a barrier, the expense of utilities for this end of the market, and that really gets translated or passed down to tenants in the affordable housing sector, which has significantly negative consequences. Also, another barrier that I would say is lack of urban management and lack of sustainable neighborhood creation, something that we're becoming more and more involved in, and how do we deliver that, and how do we ensure that people who are living in increasingly dense environments have access to anything that a sustainable neighborhood should have. And then I think I would say lastly, the last sort of barrier to delivery of affordable housing at scale is the right to build, or the challenges at the level of the right to build. In other words, giving developers access to time-use plan approval, rezonings, etc. Our clients often experience long holding periods, which people at this end of the market just cannot afford to carry. So that becomes a challenge that we need to overcome. I think that's it from me, Nikki. I'll take any questions in the Q&A section. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I really wanted to hear about this program because I think that there's been a lot of comments about compaction and also some thinking around the polycentric city. And I think we can't leave township infill development out of that discussion. And I definitely think the model which TUF is using is really innovative and exciting. So thank you so much for that, Catherine. I'm now going to ask some of the questions. I know Carl has to leave us, unfortunately. So maybe just to say thank you so much, Carl, for your rich input. And it was really interesting to see the study that you've done with the Green Buildings Council. And I know that many of us will follow up on that research to understand it more, but really, really exciting initiatives from diversity and from yourself. And we appreciate all your responses to the Q&As as well, providing input to critical questions asked. So thank you very much, Carl.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Do you want to say anything, last parting words, Carl?
No, thank you. I'm appreciative to have been here. Thank you for the invite. And I'm sorry, everyone who put really good questions. I hope you'll see that I'm busy repasting them. I sent them all only to the panelists, but I'm posting them now on the public chat. So hopefully you'll have a chance to read my answers there. And anyone who wants to get in touch, they're most welcome to do so. We're always happy to engage with people. Thank you once again, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carl. And I'm sure we can also find ways as the Urban Festival team to ensure that those responses are received. So I think one of the critical questions that have come up in the Q&A and the chat, as well as addressed by panelists as a key challenge around affordable housing and sustainability, has really been around the cost of utilities. And some examples like Carabello spoke about, where we are able to get rentals at 1,000 Rand or below for tenants, but then the cost of utilities will either be match that amount or even exceed that amount. So I think it would be good to ask Georgina if she could provide us with a little bit more information around some of the mechanisms used at the Balhair projects to really try and bring some of these utility costs down for tenants and users of affordable housing. Thanks, Georgina.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I mean, in the residential kind of environment, I mean, it's both a function of your building design, but then also very importantly around, you know, homeowners' behavior. And that's not something, you know, that's something that you either have control over. And so I think when you think about solutions, it's good to kind of separate them into those kind of departments. So we would typically call it, you know, within a design realm, and that's, you know, where the designers have control over what actually goes into the building. And then there's an existing building performance element, so to speak. So I think from a design perspective, you know, residential is quite well studied. If you look at the Edge tool, you can go and have a look at our app. It's not our app, sorry, but the IFC app of an Edge rating. And there are a whole bunch of measures, and you can actually then play around. You can, you know, put in a dummy project, and so it will give you a whole range of options. So you always fundamentally want to look at how you're heating your hot water, because as I said, that's, you know, 40% of your energy bill. You then want to look at how ideally you orient all the passive design options. So that deals with orientation. You know, sometimes you don't really have control over that when, you know, maybe when it's like a block in a big unit. You want to look at your insulation. That is something that most homeowners can have a look at, and, you know, that would mainly be in the roof. And so there's some guidance around that. You can then, I think what's really important is to install meters that actually measure your electricity consumption, and that you understand where your electricity use and where your profile is going. And so we have seen that as a very popular kind of initiative that is implemented on a lot of projects, including the affordable housing projects. And then from the behavior side, that's, you know, really around how long are you showering, you know, how much water are you putting in your kettle, you know, when are you putting your lights on, you know, looking at timers associated with your geysers. So there's interesting kind of prop tech kind of technology in that space that looks at, you know, how your profile and how your user patterns associated with your hot water can be reprogrammed. We've got a nice website called, you know, My Smart Home, which also kind of gives you nice guidelines to look at your low-hanging fruit, both with energy and with water, and it was done in collaboration with IFC. And I can drop that link in the chat function for anyone who's on the call who's interested to kind of, you know, do an experiment on their own house.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Georgina, for that information. And I think you really highlight an important component around education and usage, tenant as well as homeowner usage of these resources. And I think that actually links to another critical issue which has been raised on the chat as well as in the Q&A regarding more around human settlements. So we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about green infrastructure, but we also have to make sure at neighborhood scale that we're really developing a neighborhood and we're creating opportunities for people to improve their economic, social, and educational well-being. So, Carabello, if I can put you on the spot, I see one of the questions was really, how do you find local government in particular around coming on board and building some of the critical supportive infrastructure that you require as social housing institutions to make housing really a human settlement?
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you for the question. So the straight answer is that it is not easy and it hasn't been easy, right? So the experience has been that both, even from a social housing or a private landlord perspective, is what we find is, developers will start creating these amenities themselves and creating these safe spaces for their, within their precinct or for their tenants. So there's definitely a response in that form. But I think there's a big opportunity in better responsiveness from local municipalities. When you look at sort of our inner cities and parks and such public facilities, they're either sort of lacking or constantly not taken care of. And as earlier, what we've then seen is either the private sector or our social housing institutions would then, sort of either adopt a park or through city improvement districts, see how they can sort of manage or de-risk that. But I think there's a big part for municipalities to play. And maybe related, I think around the topic of municipalities, I think it's also critical to emphasize that what we find is our municipalities and our provinces have access to either buildings or lands in really, really prime areas that they're not extracting social value for, right? Some of the municipalities that we as National deal with are starting to think about the problem, but also equally from a policy perspective, say we have an imperative to deliver affordable housing, to restructure our municipalities. And in terms of a land release, we should not only be looking at a financial return. How do we then start assessing social return so that, our council or, for the people, we can start releasing very well located land, both for, I guess, social housing as well as general affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carabello. I see we've had such a wealth of presentations and discussions today that we're quick running out of time. I'd like to ask you if there's any closing remarks from your side, and then I'll go to Catherine and Georgina as well.
Thanks again. Maybe closing remarks would just be, just to, I guess, reflect from a housing perspective, and that'll be both social and affordable housing. I think it's important as role players that we really think about how the missed opportunity in using housing as a catalyst for urban regeneration, right? And looking at some of the questions in the chat, the moment you have a working and operating and sort of urban environment with different incomes and people earning incomes, what then happens is that some of the facilities will start coming through in the city of Johannesburg. We've seen private schools come through like the Curos and the Sparks in response to, I guess, demand because there's now a working class, low, middle, and slightly upper that's within the city. And definitely that enabling environment across all sectors of all levels of government to be quite specific. And yeah, just I guess access to capital and building these projects. I think Carol was very clear in saying that building a house, be it 30 squares or 25 squares, is is not, is not cheap. But through urban densification and maximizing, I guess, the space that's available, especially in our inner cities, I think it can definitely be done, and housing as a catalyst for that.
Thank you so much, Carabello. A nice segue into Catherine, coming from a financing institution. Catherine, some remarks from your side?
Thanks, Vicky. I would say from our side, going forward, we must continually try to push how we can introduce more ownership into the sector. So just giving people peace of mind, security of tenure, and enabling them to climb up the housing ladder. I know that's really overused, but it really to get people that kind of first leg up on behalf of financing institutions, I think is really important. And also how we can get more involved in the creation of sustainable neighborhoods and creating quality spaces for families. Kids need just so many more opportunities than they're getting right now in our urban environments. So I think for me, those two areas would be critical going forward. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you for joining us and highlighting the program that TAF is leading. Georgina?
Thanks, Nikki. I mean, I think in closing, sustainability is not necessarily rocket science. I think that, the kind of principles have been around for a long time, and I think it's around an approach to problem solving. And it's about good design. And I think that when that informs a project, regardless of whether it's affordable or whether it's not, there's so many really good knock-on effects that speak to all of these kind of social value issues, that we've raised. It's not just about the energy and the water, because it's really about thinking, is this space well suited for this typology? How can we make sure that it's financially feasible? How are we opening it up on the ground to make sure that there's, kind of small retail outlets? And I think that our professionals in South Africa are really well trained from that perspective. I think we've got a really good professional pool to work from that. I think we've also got a lot of policy around affordable housing. I'm not an affordable housing expert, but I don't necessarily think that that's the answer. I think it's around unlocking, as Catherine has mentioned, the financial feasibility around a lot of these projects to make sure that they can stand on their, on their own. I think that's the kind of key challenge that we need to kind of face to get affordable housing going forward. But I do think that when affordable housing is delivered in a green way, there's a significant degree of social value that is created. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgina. And again, to all of our panelists, thank you to everyone for joining the session. Such rich debate on the chat, as well as some really interesting questions on the Q&A. We apologize for some of the technical issues that we struggled with in the session, but I still think it was such an important conversation around affordable housing, and not just as a social good, but really as a key driver of developing more sustainable cities in our South African context in particular. And I think that there were some wonderful linkages that we can look at taking forward. I know there's been sharing of websites, sharing of videos, sharing of information that people can utilize to take these SACN thinking forward and networking amongst yourselves so that we can see more sustainable, affordable housing happening in South Africa. So thank you very much from my side. We look forward to engaging you in more discussions from the South African Cities Network. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, Nikki. Bye, everyone.
Everybody, thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Carabello. Really appreciate it.
Good.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well, eh?